Good afternoon, and thank you very much, and to our distinguished panelists, and looking forward to your comments today, and thank you for joining us for this Black History Month. We are the Resources Committee is uplifting Black America's vast contributions in a specific area to ocean science and the field of ocean policy. Black Americans are inadequately represented in ocean science, like all environmental spaces, unfortunately, yet continue to fuel innovation and progress in scientific knowledge that is a benefit to all of mankind. For example, Roger Allier Young was a brilliant marine biologist and the first Black woman to earn a doctorate in zoology. Young contributed to numerous studies, but never received credit as a co-author, contributing a phenomenon of silent scientists whose work has never been credited. In addition to guaranteeing Black scientists receive proper recognition, we must also harness the untapped potential of future generations to advance ocean climate solutions. Increasing carbon storage in blue carbon ecosystems, promoting coastal resiliency, supporting climate-ready fisheries, and tackling ocean health are all enormous challenges we need Black scientists and policy experts to tackle. Today, we're going to hear from three brilliant ocean experts that will share with us their journey to expand ocean science and policy and the need for more diversity in the ocean policy field. I'm going to introduce them. And before I do that, I think it's noteworthy to acknowledge and to recognize the reality that in even within our federal agencies responsible for ocean policy and responsible for many of the environmental issues that we are grappling with relative to the issue of climate change and climate justice in general, there is a underrepresentation of people of color, and in particular African Americans. And I think one of the issues that we discussed in a previous panel is the need to work with this administration that is more receptive and more supportive of fully promoting an integration and a diversity for our agencies and our efforts, so that we become truly reflective of the American people, in the people that are working for us and the people that are setting the policy and providing the guidance for what we need to do in the future. I think that needs to be a goal, something that this committee is committed to pursuing. The need to not only encourage, but to set the template so that we are incentivizing, partnering with institutions of higher learning, historically Black colleges being one, and minority serving institutions being another, to begin to draw upon the rich talent and diversity that exists, and beginning to bring them in to begin to reflect our country, not only in terms of employment, but in terms of perspective, history, and expertise. Let me first acknowledge and thank Dr. Jeanette Davis, also known as Dr. Ocean. She's a marine microbiologist with Sciences Everywhere, LLC. Dr. Davis contributes to ocean science nationally and internationally. Outside of her professional career, Dr. Davis is a strong advocate of community and diversity. Dr. Davis authored a children's science book entitled Science is Everywhere, Science is for Everyone. Queen Quet, chiefess and head of state for the Gulan Geechee Nation, glad to be with her again, is a leader of many talents. Queen Quet is a published author, computer scientist, lecturer, preservationist, and environmental justice advocate. She created a program called Gulan Geechee See and Me, in which C, SEA, stands for Saving Environmental Actions, and ME stands for Marine Environment. Tashiana Osborne is a PhD candidate at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California at San Diego through a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship and a University of California Fellowship. She investigates patterns and variations in rain and snow during atmospheric river storms. She also pursues opportunities to invest in youth and the environment and opportunities to share the value of research and education. I want to welcome them here. And when my good friend, Representative McEachin arrives, we'll turn to him, but let me now turn first to Dr. Davis for her comments, and then we'll follow up with some questions. Dr. Davis, please, and thank you so much for joining.
Hello?
Yes. Dr. Davis?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. First, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I really appreciate you guys extending the invitation to me. This is such an honor to be here to discuss my journey as a Black woman in ocean science. So as mentioned, I am Dr. Jeanette Davis. I am a marine microbiologist. I am an ocean policy advisor, as well as a children's science book author. And most importantly, I am a STEM diversity advocate. So with that being said, I often like to compare myself professionally as a marine microbiologist, one who focuses on studying the things in the ocean that you can't see without a microscope. I like to compare myself to CSI, or crime scene investigations, where a detective goes on a crime scene in hopes of identifying a suspect by DNA, by the DNA that they've potentially left behind. And I apply that same concept to the marine environment, where I look at water samples to identify marine organisms by the DNA that they have left behind or shed in the water column. So some of my most notable accomplishments using DNA techniques include helping to discover a marine bacterium that produces an anti-cancer compound. So a lot of my background has focused on what we call marine natural products discovery. And I've also been able to take those techniques and technologies and apply that to fisheries. And I've spent 18 consecutive days out at sea to better understand seafood and the food that we rely on, and being able to identify fish and use DNA technologies there. So taking a step back on my journey as a marine microbiologist, how did I get into the field? I often get that question, how did you know that you wanted to be a marine biologist? And the truth is, I did not know. And one reason why I didn't know is because I didn't have the language or the exposure to say that I wanted to be a marine microbiologist or a marine biologist, because I didn't see representation in the field of science. So I was one who grew up loving science, always did well in science, but would never articulate, I want to be a scientist, because I did not see Black scientists. I just did not think that was possible at all. So with that being said, I understand as a Black woman that it is really important to have representation in science generally. And that was really the primary focus of authoring my children's science book. I wanted to give young people the language and the exposure of science. So if you love animals, you get to be a zoologist. If you love plants, you get to be a botanist. And if you love the ocean, you get to be an oceanographer. And so that's the basis of the book, but it also explains science in a way that is inclusive. So the characters are characters of color and different religions and different backgrounds. So my hope is to really create a world where everyone feels comfortable exploring science. And that is also the premise of the business that I founded, Science is Everywhere, to really create safe spaces for people of color to explore science. So I think it's important to have representation. I think it's important to have diversity in science. And as we tackle some of these larger global issues, such as climate change, it's really important that we have representation in policy as well as decision making. I think that it's pivotal to have the people who are making decisions about communities be reflective of communities. And so I am on this journey to promote ocean science and awareness, but most importantly, to understand the gaps and the needs and the wants for these communities that climate change and so many other weather events and environmental pollutants and so on, anything that you can name, how they disproportionately impact some of these vulnerable communities. And I think that's where representation comes into play, and particularly around the sector of ocean policy. Thank you, and I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Let me, Queen Quet, if you, the floor is yours, please. Our next speaker would be Queen Quet. Am I muted?
Wait,
The floor is yours. Thank you.
wait in the water, wait in the water, children, wait in the water. God why trouble the water. Plenty people around the world can say they done get it. Some can say they done sing them and all and things like that. You might never get him, but this your song, yeah. Draw a wheel, this your coastline. That sand drum sound. We're bringing the Igbo, Mandinka, Malenke, Yoruba, Gola, Gizi, Mendi, Temni, Fiki, Bibio. True this your thing. What we crack, we teach you and call them Middle Passage. The rest of the people just say Atlantic, the Redawas, the ocean. We say down here in the Gullah Geechee Nation from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah, not only God going to trouble the water, but the water to bring we, the water going to take we back. So Honorable Chairman, I'm so happy to be here with you again. When you brought us back to this shoreline of understanding that our natural resources could also be our saving grace for climate action, and to now take it into a level of policy. So to be back again after we unveiled together the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act.
Yes.
During Black History Month, leading into Women's Her Story Month, and to be here with these illustrious Black women who are scientists like me. You couldn't have given me a better invitation. This is a party I've been waiting to bring the drums to, because as I come to it, I feel the same pattern, the same rhythm that we feel not only when we do a shout on these shores where my ancestors were brought in over the ocean in chains, but also the same pattern and rhythm that beats in our hearts, timed with the waves of the ocean, that are beating out a truth now, that African people have always been scientists. The first numbers system was done in Africa. The first letters were done in Africa. So our first engineers that engineered something that people can't even imagine even yet today how it was done, the pyramids on Kemet, again in the motherland. So to honor the mothers that were birthed because they were seeds of Mother Africa, I have to honor my African ancestors who are known now as Gullah Geechees, who would go to the ocean, go to the creeks, go to the waterways with cast nets that they sewed by hand. As a mathematician and computer scientist, when I look at a Gullah Geechee cast net, I immediately see math. I immediately see not only the shapes as something that we can teach, as my sister, the doctor, just talked about, but the opportunity to take the lived cultural experience and make it one of inspiration so that other future Gullah Geechee gal like me, as those young sisters in turn, as we say, they in school and say, well, I didn't even know you could do this, young. They can now look at me and say, wait a minute, but Queen Quet has a computer science and a math degree. That's all science. It's not social science. It's what they call a hard scientist, the hard sciences. And so we now have to step forward to show the world that along these shores and throughout the world, there are Black women who, even when they told us science was for the boys, we didn't believe that. That we let that same rhythm, that same heartbeat, that syncopation lead us down this path, that now we are blazing a trail that opens up like a floodgate that flows in like the ocean. New young Black girls, new BIPOC girls, new girls, women of color that say, I too want to go into the sciences, and I will go into those that are considered the hard sciences. Because when we do that, we will have the technical expertise to inform the decisions for our future, such as the policies. And I honor my mother and other women of their generation who did the sit-ins in order to get equality, to be able to open the doors for folks like me to go to schools that they couldn't go to go and get degrees of higher learning that they never were afforded the opportunity to get, only because they were Black and they were women. But they put their bodies on the line to change the policies of segregation, to change the policies to say that women were not leaders and that women couldn't do more than clean up and things like that and deal with the chemicals in that regard. Instead, now, my mother, who is in her 80s, sits in meetings about how we can change the policies on the political level so that we save the ocean, so that it saves us. Because the water to bring we, the water going to take we back. But as I always say, the land that we family and the waterway that we bloodline. So even now with the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, to ensure that bloodline remains healthy and sustained for the future, I recently released videos that are culturally related videos to educate people about the dynamics we are fighting against and making moves with in regard to climate action, including educating people about ocean acidification. Because as a Sea Islander, I live literally in the ocean, literally in this water body that is part of everybody, because it connects all of us around the world. And so I thank you so much for opening up this circle on the shore, that we could sit here and shout and celebrate our legacy of Black excellence as Black women scientists that love the ocean and that want to produce future oceanographers, future policymakers, and definitely future Black history makers that will bring us all together on the shore and be empowered with a healthy, sustained future. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, and it's good to see you again, and thank you and other advocates and people that lent their expertise both on the environmental justice legislation and on the oceans bill. I know all of us are very appreciative and very grateful for that help. It was needed and it will continue to be needed. So thank you. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Let me now turn to Ms. Osborne and ask the floor is yours for your comments.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here today in front of Honorable Chairman Grijalva and committee members, and also to share with the amazing women warriors who spoke before me. So thank you. I also want to thank Black and Indigenous heroes who we should, as a nation and a world, not only honor for their tremendous contributions and strength, but whose lessons ought to be put into actions throughout the year. I looked up at the ever-changing sky and I saw a lion, or maybe it was an elephant flying in the sky. When I was younger, I'd gaze at the sky and I would imagine shapes and clouds, shapes that the clouds would make. I'd run in the rain, play in the snow, and swim in lakes. Minuscule moments in nature gave me a sense of peace during especially chaotic times in my life. I also learned about the world around me from educators and nature-loving relatives. Early on, I grew up in Minnesota with a young single mother and a younger brother in a low-income community, not too far from where Philando Castile and George Floyd took their last breaths. I also lived in Arizona and again with family in Minnesota. I didn't know what a scientist really was or how to become one. Instead, I followed my interest in the natural world and dedicated energy and time to fight for a brighter future. I double majored in meteorology and hydrology at St. Cloud State University while working multiple jobs and also battling for my health. I found support through the multicultural student services and through scientific and cultural organizations and internships, peers and mentors. It was really never easy, and it has taken so much practice and determination over the years. I wasn't really sure if grad school was for me, but I decided to try finding out. I called my grandma and we cried tears of joy after I was accepted into Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, with full support through fellowships. I don't know how else I would have been able to pay for these expenses. Now I'm in the final year of my PhD, and I'm studying extreme rain and snow storms focused on hydrometeorology. As I learned from the Nelson Mandela, I also see my training as a powerful tool to contribute to positive change alongside others. Representation in all we do, including science and policy, matters. And it matters for everyone. Upholding values of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is not only the right thing to do, but it allows us to go further and understand more than ever before. With these included, we can develop and see through with responsible, innovative solutions to multifaceted threats as part of this international community. Although at times I've been afraid and I've been treated as if I do not belong, I continue rising even after I fall. We continue rising, all of us here today too. We bring our visions, our experiences, our expertise and communities with us until we reach closer to that mountaintop that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke of. As Maya Angelou said, just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still all rise. The ocean is important for us all, whether we live on an island near the coast or far inland. This is true in part because the ocean drives the atmosphere. The ocean sustains coastal and island communities and their rich cultures and ecosystems that we really cannot afford to lose. Changes in the ocean can contribute to more frequent and intense weather extremes on land. Pacific originating storms that reach the West are becoming more intense, increasing threats to communities, and that can damage land, crops, and infrastructure that we depend on, and endanger wildlife such as salmon. In a changing climate, the volatility of these sky rivers, tropical cyclones, and other events linked to changes in the ocean and atmosphere is increasing. And depending on the region, we can expect more intense floods, heat waves, wildfires, and more. Climate change and social justice are inextricably linked. As is often true where inequities exist, in a changing climate, the least financially wealthy suffer the most as a result of actions of the most financially wealthy. There is a responsibility and an obligation for people in positions of power or privilege to actively and consistently resist systems, policies, actions, and ideologies of oppression. The US military considers climate change to be a threat multiplier. And this means through climate change effects on oceans, weather extremes, communities, and ecosystems, that the social, economic, political inequities and instabilities that we already see and experience will be amplified. And many of these have been spotlighted already during the pandemic. Yes. I say this in resounding agreement with scientists around the world because there's no time to waste on changing the trajectory for a future we want. We must move away from our dependence on carbon and say goodbye to extractive views and actions. Responsible, equitable, science-informed policies and the implementation of international treaties will be crucial. Solutions must include focus on oceans, root causes of inequities, and plans that can be sustained long-term. And of course, we won't succeed without centering the most affected communities and without welcoming, valuing, incorporating, and also amplifying Black, Indigenous, ethnic minority, women, and youth voices as leading voices in decision-making. The United Nations designated 2021 to 2030 as the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And of course, the momentum must not stop after 2030. Scientists, students, and youths are beyond ready. The UN and communities across the nation and world are beyond ready. So my question is, are you ready? As James Baldwin proclaimed, to accept one's past, one's history is not the same thing as drowning in it. It is learning how to use it. An invented past can never be used. It cracks and crumbles under the pressures of life like clay in a season of drought. I'll close by asking, what will your legacy say about the actions you did or did not take? What state of the oceans and atmosphere and what standards for humanity will you pass on to the children of this earth who have yet to inherit it? And with that, I'll thank you again, representatives, and
Thank you
just
very
say I'm
much.
glad to be here.
Thank you very much. And for all three of our distinguished panelists, let me just some general questions, if I may, and then Ms. Osborne, you mentioned that at the end that the linkage in dealing with social justice and the component of climate justice and making sure that no one's left behind and no one has to suffer an undue burden as a consequence of us dealing with the issue. And that effort is critical to how we respond. And but this question is for all. You know, I'm from Arizona. We're Sonoran Desert, and we're an arid region of the world and region of this country, and growing up and I drawn to natural resource issues. Obviously, my focus was on public lands, the utilization of those, what they did to what public lands could in the future do to combat and to be a contributor to solution on the question of climate change and emission and greenhouse and the warming of our planet. And then, you know, because of good fortune and the position that I'm in, I received an education. And that education had to do on the topic that we're talking about today. And that had to do with the role of oceans in combating climate change and what that role can be going forward. And I came to understand the importance, but I think I just want to leave that open now for any of your responses. Is how important are oceans going to be in combating climate change and dealing with the questions that people are asking about what are going to be not only the national but international efforts to deal with the question. So if we can start with you, Ms. Osborne, and then proceed with Ms. Davis and Queen Quet. But if you don't mind, just what role oceans can play in the, for a long time, people have minimized that role, but I think its prominence now is more and more important. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chairman. The ocean is so important, and just thinking about it in terms of this large, this huge option that we have to store heat. It's always storing heat, and so that's something that it's been doing, and we don't always understand the full effect or the details of that effect on animals living in the ocean and what that might mean for us also on land. And so learning more about it and learning about the deep ocean, the changes in temperature and circulation and how that will also interact with changes in the atmospheric circulation will be really important. So fueling or making sure that the decisions are also informed by strong science and that science is supported will be really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, going off of what Ms. Osborne just stated, you know, just to expand a bit on that a little more, is, you know, oceans ultimately regulate global climate. You know, it is incredibly important. Sometimes we often think about just weather, right? And it's possible you can predict what's going to happen tomorrow based on checking the atmosphere. But if you want to think about climate overall, that requires the ocean in the atmosphere. So it plays a huge role in, as mentioned, mediating temperature, rainfall, drought, floods. All of that is going to be really important. So the ocean is critical there. But, you know, when we think about greenhouse gases and those things that contribute to climate change, you know, I often like to think about it as, you know, the greenhouse gases are essentially like blankets that cover our planet. And the more that we are emitting greenhouse gases or putting certain gases in the atmosphere, the more blankets that we are putting on our planet, which leads to more global warming and climate
Good
change.
analogy.
And the ocean plays a huge role in really being a storage for one of those gases, the carbon. So the ocean is critical in climate change. There needs to be more research there, more emphasis there on the role that it plays. And then lastly, I would say, I always tell people, you know, there's a reason why the ocean is more than 70% of the planet. In fact, when people go to look at life in other planets, the first thing that they look for is water, because it plays a huge impact on life as we know it. And so keeping that in mind, climate change is the same thing. We really need to better understand our oceans and our ocean environment to solve climate change and many of these global issues overall.
Thank you. Queen?
Yes, sir. I want to ditto what both of my sisters here have already said in regard to the impacts that many scientists talk about, what the ocean does in terms of storing heat, storing carbon, because as we have more of the heat island effect happening because of urbanization and paving, we also now are trying to find a balance. Like, how do we do that? But one of the things that I also want to mention that a lot of times the scientific community kind of sits it to the side, but food security. When we are talking about climate change and you mentioned environmental justice, a major aspect of this is if we don't have a sustainable food system, we don't survive. If we don't have sustainable waters, healthy waters, we don't survive. So if we look at our bodies, not just the earth and the percentage of our human bodies that consist of water, then anything dealing with the ocean ought to concern us because our bodies parallel with the ocean and the ocean then feeds us. So when we talk about seafood, for instance, if we continue to allow the ocean to acidify because we urbanize everything instead of using natural solutions, we then put toxins into the water. As we talk about this heat absorption, we start getting an acidification. The pH balance of the ocean is no more, which now affects our shellfish. We don't can have the sustainable oyster shells out there, the oyster beds out there. If we don't have those, we don't have the natural purifiers of the water. And we also then don't have what many people love to eat, oysters on the half shell, clams on the half shell. We don't have our blue crabs anymore. But also because we are talking about water, consider flooding and how we need to mitigate that. As the climate has been changing, we see that there are greater flood impacts, even on king tides. We don't even have to wait till there are tropical storms and hurricanes. So when you live on sea islands, you realize that the ocean comes in very rapidly, goes out very rapidly. But we also need those natural buffers that then protect what makes up the maritime forests of the Sea Islands. The Spartina grass is behind those oyster beds. Then come the trees, and there's the community in which we live. So when we talk about making sure that we value the ocean and what it can bring to us as a natural resource and a tool, in essence, the power of the ocean to change the climate in a way that's positive, we have to make sure that our human actions are actually doing things in a natural way that will protect the sustainability of those oceans, thereby protecting our seafood and having food security so our people can eat healthy and stay strong for the fights ahead.
Thank you. Before we go on to other questions, let me no introduction necessary, but my brother in arms, Representative McEachin. Let me turn the floor over to him for his comments or any questions that he might have. Mr. McEachin, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you. It's good to be with you. I've had the privilege of hosting these Black history events with you in the past, and they've been enjoyable. And this one, no doubt, will be enjoyable. And I look forward to doing this with you in the future. As I was sitting here looking at these wonderful African-American women who are so learned and have accomplished so much, I started thinking about children or the parents of children who might be watching this program or may watch it as it's rebroadcast over the days and weeks to come. And I was wondering, ladies, if each one of you would just take a few minutes and highlight your journey. What type of degree do you have? What were the obstacles to getting that degree? And what is it that you do with that degree in concrete terms so that maybe a young person who might be interested in the ocean understands the path that they might need to follow? And since Ms. Osborne, you're the first one to my right, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Representative. So I shared a little bit of it already, but I
apologize.
No worries. I just will pick out some key points in case it's helpful. I grew up in Minnesota in a low income community, and something that helped me a lot when I look back, something I think really helped was that we enrolled in schools that were outside of our neighborhood. And so that just goes to say that education is really important, and the quality of that education is really important. Within our communities, we didn't have that. And so we would bus out to others. And I also had some exposure to the natural world early on, some family members who were interested in and loved nature. And so that was helpful that they were able to pass that on to me. It wasn't all of my family members, but just having a couple of people introduce me to that. And then I saw women on TV that would point at clouds and point at screens. And I found out they were called meteorologists. And so the combination of watching TV and actually like running out in the rain and enjoying nature is what somehow led me into science. But it wasn't that easy to, as just being led into it. I had to find supportive communities in every space I went to. So I was part of the National Society of Black Engineers, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and the Multicultural Student Services. So having that type of support and the inclusion piece is key, and there's more that we can still do in those areas within our institutions.
Thank you.
I'll go next if that's okay.
That's more than fine.
Okay, then. So I guess I'll start by saying I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware. I said this earlier today, but I loved science growing up. I loved playing outdoors. I was that kid who played in plants. Anywhere I saw a plant, I wanted to play with the bees. That was the only kid who wanted to play with the honeybees. But I love science. I love nature. but I did not see representation in science. I had no language to say that I wanted to be a scientist. In fact, I went to Hampton University for undergrad. I am a strong advocate of HBCUs and minority serving institutions. And I went to Hampton University for undergrad and thought to myself, well, I love science and chemistry was my favorite. So I thought I'd be a chemistry major and go to medical school, because growing up, the only type of people I saw who liked science or who were scientists were medical doctors or engineers. And they are scientists, but they are applied scientists. So they oftentimes take the research scientists, like someone like myself with a PhD would do in a laboratory and apply it to medicine for medical doctors, or maybe pharmacists would also apply it, or even engineers take that information and apply it. But I didn't have the language to say I wanted to be a research scientist. I wanted to be the person who came up with the hypothesis. I wanted to test in the field. I didn't see that, so I couldn't say it. But going to Hampton University, they are on the water, on the Hampton River, and I happened to look down at the marine science department. And this is super nerdy, but I went into the department and looked at the curriculum and discovered to study the ocean is to study a variety of sciences. So I found my love for science in the ocean because I had to learn chemistry and biology and physics. And I was introduced to meteorology and botany and geology and all of these ologies. And I said, wow, the ocean is the science for me, because you can't study the ocean in isolation. It's most of our planet. It impacts what we eat. It impacts culture. It impacts communities. In fact, 60% of the population in the US reside around the coast. It's that important, and it intersects in so many ways, even social science. So that's where I fell in love with science, and I did internships every summer. So for young people, you can do it even if you don't see people who look like you, but it is important to network, to get your feet wet literally in the field, try new things. And ultimately, I got a PhD in marine drug discovery because I found out that the ocean is also a huge resource for drug discovery. So when you go to the doctors and you're sick, a lot of the compounds that we use are mimicked from the environment overall, including the ocean environment. So there's huge potential there. And then later on, after I finished my PhD, I said, I want to make decisions for communities that look like me. And so I went into the government, and now I'm on this path of integrating both ocean science and policy. So what I would say to young people is that you're not limited to any particular field of study. Be passionate, love what you do. Yes, there are challenges, but continue to push through and create the change that you want to see, because you're worthy of that.
Thank you for that.
Good.
It's interesting. I love this question because I am from a rural sea island in South Carolina, only miles from Georgia. And I am Gullah Geechee, where we the crack we teeth like this and thing like that. And when we don't go in school, they try to beat them out of the week. So
You know, I understood all that because my in-laws are from South Carolina.
Well, see that? So homeboy. So here it is, that going to school as a Gullah Geechee Black girl, we were not encouraged to speak our own language. So we were often discouraged from continuation of our own culture. Now, fortunately, my family was proudly Gullah Geechee. So my mother, her aunts, her uncles, my grandfathers, my father, all of them are outdoor people that continued our African traditions of sewing their own nets, going into the creek, crabbing, shrimping, fishing. They're hunters and all of that. So the outdoor component wasn't something unique. That's just what you do. That's who we are. So we're inextricably tied to that. That is us. But the thing that got me into what is considered to be science was my brother, God bless the dead. My brother, Ron, who was a decade older than me, would be doing his homework. And I would come along wanting to know what is that you're doing. And he was doing algebra, and I was only 4 or 5 years old. And I wanted to know, why was he mixing numbers and letters together? So he stopped and he showed me what these things were. And I was like, well, what's the lines? What's the lines for? And all that. And he would show me what fractions were and all of these things at that age. I immediately took the numbers. I had been reading already for a couple of years. So they knew they could put a book in front of me and that would occupy my time. So now you put a book in front of me with numbers, and I'm curious about these numbers. So I started loving math from then. So by the time I was in even 5th grade, my math teacher here at St. Helena Elementary School ended up sending over to the high school, the junior high and the high school, for their math books and their science books, because I would have completed books in a month. So he had the book for the class. I was finished with that the first 2 months of the class. So now what's he going to do with me for the rest of the year? So he got to do something. So he sends to the junior high. He gets their book. I finish it in a couple of months. So he sends to the high school. They get their book. So now I look back over that now and I say how blessed I was, because I had teachers and I had family members that didn't discourage me and say, well, you're doing stuff ahead of your time. Don't do that. Or you're a girl. Why are you so into this? Why don't you just take the home ec class and be happy with it? You know, I took home ec too. I made A's in math. I made A's in science. I made A's in home ec. I was always a straight A student. So when they had career day, by the time we got to the junior high here at St. Helena, I went through the pathway and there was this box on the desk. That was an early computer, an IBM. And I'm going, hey, I know about IBM because my brother works there, the other brother I have. So I'm like, oh, so what's this doing here? And the person started explaining to me. I said, well, why you got ones and zeros on this paper? They said, because that's how these work. That's the language of them. So there I was again with the numbers on the paper, intrigued. So although I did, like my sister said, I went and studied engineering. They asked for me to come to Virginia Tech. They wanted to give me a full ride there. I studied nursing and medical because my teachers wanted me to go into that kind of science. But all that blood and death wasn't for me. But I loved the numbers. So when I saw the box and they said the box talks based on the ones and the zeros, and if you program them right, you can produce all these other things. That was all I needed. So I ended up going to school for computer science and mathematics, double major, graduated with a 3.909 average in my major, and have been doing the math and the science of everything I could imagine ever since, and was the first person to ever put my culture on the internet. I put the first website for Gullah Geechee on the internet, and then started teaching classes about my culture and my community. So I always say to people that my computer is my drug of choice. And so I said the next one would be books. And if it's a book that has some numbers in it, you probably got my interest. And so definitely it has been a blessing to be able to look back then at all the things we did in the creek and at the beach, and now be able to actually articulate that scientifically, but then articulate it culturally to my community. And so that's why it's so important to me that I go to schools all the time when there's not a pandemic. And now some schools invite me there virtually to talk to the students, to inspire them, to especially say to them that even though you might be from down south, you might be from a rural community, you might be from a community that statistically is not rich financially, that does not mean that your spirit has to be poor. All right. That means that you come from people who were so rich in science, in strength, that they were called Black gold. And so you are here to polish off, to discover and mine out that Black gold within you, polish it off and let it shine. And we know who we be. We be Gullah Geechee anointed people. And so God don't make no mistakes. And God blessed us to still be here and blessed me to be that Black Gullah Geechee gal from Centel Island, South Kakalaki, cracking the teeth like Odisha, that is going around the world and looking at the science of it and fighting for us to hold on to it and inspire other young ladies to do the same.
That's very inspiring. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, let me just ask her one last question. And I apologize for being late.
No,
What is it that you do for a living?
I am the head of state for the Gullah Geechee Nation. So what I do every day is to help keep our culture alive. And what I do so-called for a living to pay the bills is that I speak around the world on various topics. And nowadays, more on how do we combat the climate change dynamics using cultural heritage as a mechanism to do that. And so that is what keeps the lights on, one might say. And I don't have to so much worry about the water running because it still got a hand pump. Since you got people from South Kakalaki, you should know about that too.
I do. And, you know, Jim Clyburn is going to get us for not inviting him to this so he could see his sister.
And I know that's right. Well, y'all can't be hugging and stuff, but you at least try to give him a little fist bump for me and tell him that I definitely send my love and blessings to him. I watch him on TV often. I tweeted him this morning and definitely tell him I'm still celebrating with him and we still fighting for the same cause for sure.
Well, thank you for all your contributions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. One other question pertinent to what Mr. McEachin and myself know is both a policy issue, but also an initiative that needs work. The importance of diversity with regards to ocean science and in the ocean policy field. Why is that important? And yes, careers, yes, employment, yes, the personal satisfaction one gets from doing something that is significant to oneself. But as we talk about this, you know, the issue of diversity. Not as and the substance of that I think continues to be important, and how our departments respond to that going forward, and the demand that there be concerted efforts to get to that. Could you respond to that importance of diversity, not just as something symbolic, but something substantive? And the support Absolutely. That might be necessary in order to make that effective and to reach the people that need to be reached and brought in and be integrated into what I think is ocean science and ocean policy being a huge field that needs that diversity. Please. We'll begin with
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I thank you for asking this question, because last year, and then early, starting off this year, I've been inundated with being asked to be part of discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just about every one of them, I've made it clear that if you are only having this to be a discussion and not to dismantle racism, you need not ask me to return. Because when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, none of those words also mean the word equality. And so I believe that if we are going to do something effectively, we have to have equality within that mix also when we bring up the word diversity. Because diversity is what we have right here. It's diverse. We got men and women, right? And we're from all different places. That's diverse. But are we trying to just mix a group of folks? Or are we trying to bring people in that have the voice, have the lived experience, and that truly are the ones being impacted on the front shorelines of the changes we're talking about that we want to make? And I think that that is where we get the inclusion part. That's when we become truly Jedis. That justice component comes into the equity, the diversity, because we're inclusive of everybody and we are willing to sit in the circle together on the shorelines and hear the differences of voices that sometimes may not speak in the scientific lingo.
Yep.
may not talk that way at all, but they are regular, everyday folks that could say to you, I know there's a problem. As my sisters have said, they may not have the words to articulate it in the way you want it articulated in a particular policy. That's why you got policy writers. You may not have the word to say it scientifically. That's why we have scientists. They can translate it. But we need to have the communities, the indigenous communities, the communities of people of color, the Gullah Geechee communities. We need to be at the table under the oak tree in the circle with you in the discussions, because we're right here where the issue is that you want to set new things to change them for the better. You can do it more rapidly if you come straight to where the issue is, instead of sitting high on the hill looking down and hoping somebody gets you the information. If you engage with the people right there on the shoreline, they can share it with you, and then we can translate it into any other things that it needs to go into. But it also shows that you have a heart for truly the survival of humans, because as scientific as we can get, we got to remember we are fighting for communities of people, so that those communities of people are here in the future.
Dr.
Yeah, and I
Davis,
just like,
or whoever.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah. No worries. I like to just add on to that. You know, if you look at just some of the recent hurricanes that we've had, Irma, Harvey, Maria, Katrina, Sandy, all of those impacted brown and Black communities that were most vulnerable. So that also just goes back to my point that it's not enough to sprinkle the word diversity and inclusion or equity or justice, whatever hot topic word you want to use. That's just not enough. It is important that policymakers, that decision makers are representative of the communities that are disproportionately impacted by some of these extreme weather events that I just named. So yes, it is self-fulfillment, like you said. It is, yeah, I'm doing something, I'm paying the bills, but it really is about community. Going back to what was said, it's about representation, and it's also about understanding the actual needs for the community. You can't, as a decision maker or policy maker, you know, just solely go off what you want. You have to understand the needs and the wants and the actual science that is needed in that particular community. So again, I like to use the word representation, because that to me includes everything. That includes the equality, that the equity, however you want to put it. Just make sure that people who are making decisions represent the people who are impacted by the decisions.
Well said. Well said.
And I'll just add a little bit to that, because I agree so much with what was already said. We cannot have just the diversity piece. There needs to be a change in the health and the climate of our environments, and that includes in fields of policy and science. And so that when there are Black and brown faces in leadership positions or within these spaces, that they can really have their voice heard and acknowledged and carry further as a leader. And the piece about having representation is really important, because when people are the ones, when the leaders are the ones who have grown up in the communities that are the most affected, they have ideas on how to uniquely and really holistically address the problems. And then in addition to that, it's the right thing to do for our humanity. And at the same time, we can go further with our solutions by incorporating input from those who have different experiences and backgrounds. So it's also having this opportunity, thinking of it as an opportunity to go further than we've ever gone before.
Thank you very much. I'm reminded of a discussion with tribal elders relative to an issue of mining that was occurring. And the elders said, you know, our fish are sick. They're sick. And it is and it's being caused upstream. Our fish are sick. The people that were listening to them were very good folk and scientists and other consultants brought in from Fish and Wildlife and other services who are looking at these older indigenous folk, and they're not scientists. They didn't have the background. They didn't have the validation that I did academically. So 3.5 years later, after all the extensive studies were done, the fish were sick, and they were sick from the toxic releases that were happening as a consequence of that uranium mine that was upstream. And it reminds me of that the people that are living it and knowing it and have generationally understood it, were in a position to be the warning sign, but nobody listened. And I think given the right representation, that people will listen, and I'm always reminded of that, because that was, nobody listened to those elders, and they were absolutely correct that was causing it. Mr. McEachin, let me turn to you if you have any other questions, or if you're.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any other questions. I'll just comment that this is a most wonderful way to end Black History Month with these three queens. And I appreciate them sharing their journey with us and with those who are listening in or maybe listening in the future. I just want to encourage you all to continue to do what you're doing. You all are each in your own way trailblazers. And it is while you may stand on the shoulders of others who helped you get to where you are, trust me when I tell you there'll be folks climbing on your shoulders here shortly to even take your work further than you would ever imagine. So we thank you for what you've done. We thank you for what you're going to do, and we wish you all God's blessings.
Thank you, Mr. McEachin, and well said. And let me thank you as well. Not just inspirational. I think as we replay this and distribute this, I think people will come to an understanding. And I hope that I'm a grandpa now. I've got 2 granddaughters, and I want them to have the full option of opportunities in front of them, that they're not restricted by their gender, their race, their anything. And I think you provide a roadmap that being who you are and representing important interests besides yourselves, I think is inspirational, and I want to thank you so much. And we wanted to, as part of Black History Month, acknowledge a portion of the contributions that African Americans have made to this nation of ours and continue to make. And this is an area that shouldn't be unsung, and we hope we've done our little part to make it such, and to profile significant individuals, in this case, the 3 of you, that are doing the work and providing the leadership for the future. So thank you a lot. Appreciate your time. And thank you, Mr. McEachin. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr.